Hello, I'm Pete Wolf, the Executive Director of PABC, the Professional Aviation Board of Certification, and I thank you for giving us this opportunity to introduce you to the 3PK, the Professional Pilot Preparedness Knowledge, Training Criteria, and Testing that PABC is now developing to support the future growth of our air transport industry. This introduction is constructed in 4 parts that we show here: a description of PABC, the results of an FAA-funded evaluation of the 3PK concept that we're now developing, the 6-step plan for the research project we've just launched in January of 2016, and what PABC offers to and asks from the stakeholders of our industry that will be served by this effort. Let's get started with Part 1, who we are, what we do, and why. This part will address PABC's mission, our concerns about industry growth, and the growing global pilot shortage. PABC is an international NGO, a non-profit, non-governmental organization, and we claim that position because we are dedicated to providing a service that will benefit our entire global air transport system. Our mission is shown here. It is to ensure that pilots are prepared to enter initial new hire training for entry into our professional workforce through the use of PABC's ISO-accredited knowledge testing system. Now, I'll make 2 points here. The first is we are not a training organization, and secondly, we're an independent body evaluating the preparedness of the candidate, and that gives real credibility to the candidate's status. The 3PK is managed and operated by PABC, and it supports PABC's global mission by developing and maintaining stakeholder-defined knowledge criteria for ab initio cadet pilots. I emphasize stakeholder-defined as opposed to a set of criteria established based upon the minimum regulatory standards. And support the mission by conducting knowledge testing of pilots who seek employment in professional service so that we assure that those candidates are ready to enter initial new hire training. In the past, pilots who held a commercial pilot's license with instrument rating were sufficiently well prepared to enter an airline's initial indoctrination and type rating course. However, in recent years, the rapid changes that have taken place in virtually every aspect of air operations have made it virtually impossible for many of the world's regulatory authorities to keep their training requirements and licensing exams up to date and sufficient to meet the needs of today's airline transport industry. In fact, the International Civil Aviation Organization in 2011 published a study that showed that pilots need basic airline transport pilot ATP level knowledge to successfully complete airline new hire training. And it went on to say that it's probable that the majority of current airline transport pilot knowledge exams fail to validate that the pilot has the necessary knowledge competencies, that's the ability to apply that knowledge, needed in order to proceed with indoctrination to an international air operator. What that second paragraph means is that even though a pilot may have passed the knowledge examination given by the national authorities, it doesn't assure that the pilot is ready to enter an airline's new hire training program. The 3PK is designed to support both the traditional ab initio training programs and the recently developed multi-crew pilot license form of ab initio training. While the flight experience gained in these 2 types of programs differ significantly, cadets graduating from both of these programs need the same level of theoretical knowledge in order to be well prepared to enter a follow-on initial new hire training course for service with an airline or business operator. The ATP level 3PK test will provide credible, independent proof that the pilot has actually acquired that knowledge and knows how to apply it in basic normal operations before he or she enters an initial new hire course. The focus of the 3PK is to prepare a pilot to serve as a member of a crew operating a modern fixed-wing turbine-powered aircraft. And here is a high-level list of the topics that are incorporated in the 3PK training criteria, and of course will be tested as a part of the process. MPL students are screened and selected by a sponsoring airline, and as they proceed through phases 1, 2, and 3 of their training programs, and then complete ATP level testing, in this case by the 3PK, they move directly into the final phases of training for line operations by their MPL sponsoring airline. Under the 3PK concept, traditional ab initio pilots would complete the courses and earn the licenses associated with those programs, then take the ATP level knowledge examination issued by the 3PK, and then enter a pilot pool from which any airline or business operator can draw candidates. At that point, the courses are employer-funded initial indoctrination and type rating courses preparing the pilot for line service. Over time, the 3PK training and testing criteria will keep up with industry and regulatory changes, as well as advances in training and testing methods that can make each element more effective. When we're asked, why is PABC developing these new training criteria and tests? The quote from the ICAO study report provides the answer. This is a major problem for the 7 stakeholder communities in our industry that we've listed here. PABC is created primarily by current and former professionals from each of those communities from around the world, and this organization, PABC, is dedicated to correcting the problem for the mutual benefit of all 7 communities. When ab initio graduates fail to have the knowledge and competencies needed, that lack of preparedness causes delays and sometimes failures in training that disrupt the operator's plans for expanding their services and lead to operational errors and inefficiencies that are also costly. And those knowledge gaps and misunderstandings can often go undetected initially and sometimes long into a pilot's career, posing a latent long-term risk to future operational safety and effectiveness. The knowledge standards and testing problems that we've been discussing are a significant factor in creating today's growing global pilot shortage. But now let us focus on a much larger causal factor, the underproduction of new pilots. The blue numbers shown in mid-chart are Boeing's 20-year forecast for the number of new pilots that we'll need to train each year in order to staff the commercial aircraft that are planned to operate in the years ahead. For example, in 2013, Boeing projected that we need to graduate 24,900 new ab initio pilots to meet this demand every year until 2032. But the 2011 ICAO study reported that their research team was not able to collect accurate figures on how many pilots are produced each year around the world. And that's still the case. We only have estimates, not credible data, for the full global production rate. Those estimates indicate that we are only training between 15 and 20,000 new pilots who hold commercial pilot licenses with instrument ratings each year. If that's correct, we're globally underproducing by 5,000 to 10,000 pilots per year, and it's easy to see the impact that this can have on the planned growth of our industry. PABC recognizes the serious quantity problem this represents, but we also know that quality issues mentioned earlier must also be solved. In fact, PABC believes that we must solve the quality problem first, because it will do us no good to produce 25 or even 30,000 pilots who are unable to complete airline initial new hire courses when they're hired. That's why PABC exists, and the rest of this video describes what we plan to do to correct the problem permanently. We'll now move on to part 2 the FAA-funded evaluation of PABC's proposed concept for generating the standards and examination. In 2014 and 15, the FAA funded a workforce development study conducted by the Center for Aviation Safety Research, CASR, to evaluate PABC's concept for developing a stakeholder-defined, ATP-level, professional pilot knowledge set of training criteria, and a test to assess pilots' knowledge and competence in those subject areas. As you know, a commercial pilot and instrument rating ab initio course is generally focused on single pilot operation, mostly in single-engine aircraft, addressing basic flying skills and use of simple aircraft systems, and nearly all of it is done below 10,000 feet. The industry has long known that that was not adequate preparation for a pilot seeking a professional career. And so they've created, as part of a industry initiative, bridge courses or programs that address high-altitude jet operation familiarization as well as multi-crew coordination. But those courses vary significantly in their scope and content and quality, and therefore there isn't a consistent standard when one has said they completed a bridge program. PABC's objective is to combine its stakeholder-defined 3PK training criteria with well-defined bridge criteria that introduce fundamental international jet and high-altitude operational concepts with the multi-crew coordination skills that keep pace with changes in the industry. Pilots who successfully pass the 3PK test will be issued a PABC credential that indicates that they're well prepared to enter an employer's new hire initial training program. As shown on the left side of this slide, the 3PK multi-crew training criteria will go well beyond the simple exchange, if you will, between a captain and first officer in crew coordination. It will incorporate typical interactions with cabin staff, ATC, technical services, and others that pilots might commonly encounter in routine flight operations. 3PK tests will make frequent use of scenario-based questions that will require the pilots to apply their knowledge in dealing with common operational issues and seek input from some of the non-pilot resources when appropriate. This image shows the 13 steps that we conducted during the 12 months of the research project, and it reflects the 13 steps that are required by ISO, the International Standards Organization, in order to meet their criteria for a valid and effective examination for professional application. They are the gold standard for testing of professionals around the world, and ultimately we anticipate PABC and its examination, both the operation and the test itself, to qualify for ISO accreditation. Although the Center for Aviation Safety Research and PABC had hoped that we would be able to have a research project that would encompass pre-flight to post-flight activities, the time constraints on the process over a 12-month period and funding restrictions made it necessary for us to limit the scope of this particular set of training criteria and testing to the top of descent, through the descent and approach phase of flight, and then to the missed approach point or the decision height. That was the extent of what we refer to here and in later portions of our presentation as the limited 3PK. This slide shows the features and functions that the subject matter experts from around the world recommended be incorporated in PABC and its operation in the design and development of both the training criteria and the examination. I'll let you pause the tape and look at it more carefully if you wish. I'll move on now to the findings. You can imagine that PABC was delighted with the fact that the 3PK concept, the training criteria, and the tests that were created were all validated as both credible and effective. The test also confirmed that pilots who held only commercial pilot license with an instrument rating indeed had gaps in their knowledge that would make it very difficult for them to successfully complete an airline or business operator's new hire training program. We'll now move on to Part 3, PABC's 6-step plan and the timeline. In this portion of our program, we'll be looking at the insurer's proposal called Test Train. We'll also see the 6-step proof of concept process that we've planned out for the coming years, and we'll look at the future use of test train when the 3PK matures. When we described the 3PK to aviation insurers, they said, look, airlines hire pilots from around the world, from other airlines, corporate flight departments, the military, and ab initio training programs. And while many of these pilots may only hold a commercial pilot's license and instrument rating, others will hold an airline transport pilot license and have considerable experience. So here's what we'd recommend. Wait until the pilots are hired. This shows that the pilot's new employer believes that the pilot is suitable for entry into training. Then give the pilots the 3PK test before they begin new hire training, and use this as a means of identifying any gaps that they may have in their knowledge of the subjects that are being tested. Then, based on those results, give them remedial training in order to correct any deficiencies and gaps that they may have in knowledge and competencies, so that they are well prepared to enter the new hire course. This will not only prove the value of the 3PK as a gap analysis tool at this stage, but it will also better prepare the pilots for entry into the program, both of which are great benefits to the industry and the individual. The insurance community would benefit as well, and therefore we would be willing to share the cost of this testing and remedial training because it will help us assess the risk that we're assuming with each policy that we issue. The first step in our 6-step plan is to expand the limited 3PK testing that was conducted last year in the FAA-funded study to an additional 300 pilots coming from 5 or 6 airlines around the world to see whether or not the results of the test are similar to those received in the FAA study. If they are, it will justify our use of the exam and move on to step 2 in the process. Step 2 in the research project will take place in 2017, and it will again use the limited 3PK. We'll be testing another 600 pilots, 2/3 of whom will receive remedial training, 1/3 will not, and the purpose behind that is to see what difference it makes for the pilots to have received remedial training and therefore presumably be well prepared to enter this phase of the airline's training course. Those pilots will be randomly selected and they'll be taught by instructors from well-respected ab initio training organizations. Those organizations and the instructors will design and deliver the remedial training. Now, there'll be several of them, so we'll be able to compare the difference between the various programs that they offer because the design of the course is up to those instructors. The program, because it's a limited 3PK and merely refers to the top of descent to the missed approach point, is expected to take 6 days or less. If the results of our Step 2 testing show that the remediation training that the candidates received improved their performance in the subject areas addressed in that remedial training and made them more capable of being successful in class, then it will justify our development of the full 3PK training criteria and test to be completed by the end of December 2018. During 2018, we will continue to expand the testing of another 800 pilots, as it shows here on the yellow bar, at several airlines from around the world. And it will not only increase the size of the database on the kinds of deficiencies that pilots have in their knowledge, but it will also help us assess our capacity to conduct testing on a larger scale around the world. In 2019, we'll conduct Step 4, which is to evaluate the full 3PK. That's an examination that will cover the subject areas from pre-flight to post-flight using the same approach that we did with Steps 2 and 3, where part of the class will receive remediation and part will not. Now, these are several classes involving roughly 1,000 pilots, as it shows on the little yellow bar. And it will involve assessing the knowledge, skills, and competencies in the full spectrum of activities for this flight profile. It will also help us upgrade our test management practices on a much broader scale of subject areas and testing. Step 5 will be conducted in 2020, and you'll note from the graphic that we'll be applying the PK test again for all pilots, but all pilots, not just a portion of the group, will receive targeted remedial training as needed for any deficiencies that they might have through the testing. Notice in the yellow bar that in this case we'll be expanding the test even further to approximately 15 airlines and another 1,500 pilots, for a total of over 4,000 pilots tested throughout the 5 steps of this research project. We believe that that will give a credible number for the industry to consider as it weighs the value of test train as well as the results of our research project going forward. This slide shows an illustration of the 5 steps that we've accomplished up to this point, and then shows step 6 as an element that now will begin the first operational use of the 3PK examination. You can also see here in the arrangement of the larger boxes down below that the process is the one that we expect to follow regarding the test train model, where pilots come in, they hold CPL instrument rating requirements. They are then tested after they're hired and receive remediation, as we've been discussing. In Step 6, from 2021 and beyond, PABC's objective will be to gain industry recognition for the 3PK as an industry best practice, in the same way that IOSA and ISBEO achieved that status. The 3PK supports trainers and employer operators when they use the training criteria as a reference for development and management, and use the test as part of the employer's new pilot screening and selection process. As the percentage of programs based on the 3PK training criteria increases, PABC expects that pilots from those programs will gradually reduce the need for post-hiring test-train remedial courses. From 2022 onward, we hope that PABC's 3PK will be accepted by civil aviation authorities around the world as an alternative means of compliance for their ATP-level professional pilot licensing exams. By 2023, we expect the 3PK to be a respected industry best practice and a strongly preferred, but not a required, hiring credential. The colored blocks in the middle of the slide show that competitive pilot applicants will have passed the test before applying for a job because of hiring preference. But pilots can be hired without having taken the test. However, most employers will want them to pass it before starting the airline's new hire training program. I'll tell you why in a moment. As shown on the yellow strip at the bottom of the slide, PABC is capable of using its network of secure and well-managed offices around the world to test 25,000 or more pilots every year. Because regulators and the industry will be given copies of the full 3PK training criteria in 2019, they will have had 4 years to incorporate those criteria into their courses before the 3PK test becomes an industry best practice. We expect that pilots who have passed the 3PK test will be given interview and hiring preference when applying for jobs. However, note, the 3PK only assures that the pilots have the theoretical knowledge and competency expected by the industry, but it does not assess their flying skills. Thus, passing the 3PK test does not guarantee that the pilot will be hired, but will assure that he or she will be given serious consideration by operators who are hiring new pilots. Insurance underwriters suggest that starting in 2021, as they've done with previous safety initiatives, they could offer operators an incentive to adopt the 3PK new criteria in the form of a discount on their insurance premiums. To qualify, most, if not all, of a company's new pilots would be required to pass the 3PK test before they begin an employer's new hire training course. Potentially, as a further incentive for the 2-year period 2021 and 22, some portion of the cost of the operator's remedial training could continue to be funded by IATA and ICCAIA, augmented by funds from each operator's insurance premium discount and discounts offered by the remedial training providers. From 2023 on, industry funds are expected to cease, and operators will be reliant on the insurance premium discounts to pay for their respective remedial training costs. From 2023 on, PABC will post a leaderboard on our website to recognize training providers whose students pass the 3PK test on their first attempt. This information is intended to assist each of the stakeholders that we've listed in blue text in the ways that are shown in the black text on this slide. As the 3PK becomes an alternative means of compliance for state-level testing for commercial and airline pilot licenses and instrument ratings, pilot mobility from one country to another will increase. It will be easier for pilots to convert their licenses in order to work in countries other than their normal home, and pilot shortages and surplus will be reduced. Those are the byproducts and the benefits of this operational research project. We'll now move on to part 4, where we'll look at what PABC offers our 7 stakeholders and what we're asking of our industry. As the title says, this project will enable all stakeholders to make this significant transition comfortably, cost-effectively, and confidently in just 8 years. We'll be making active use of systems safety management programs from around the world, and it's shown here with several of the bullets below the title, so that we get the best information possible and the most current information that enable us to keep our training criteria and examination current with the latest changes in the industry, and feed that information into the training criteria and testing that we develop. PABC will conduct our own safety management system, and will use de-identified and aggregate test results from the students who've sat for the 3PK exam to pass that information on to trainers in general, so that they are able to see the kinds of deficiencies that pilots coming in and sitting for the exam have demonstrated. That will help them look at their programs to decide what they need to upgrade and improve upon. We'll also be providing the same information to the employers so that they may be aware of potential deficiencies that they could see as they're taking the 3PK graduates in their programs, and may see those deficiencies appear even though we did our best to catch them. We'll then ask the employers to provide us with feedback on the kinds of things that they did in fact see when the pilots came aboard in their new hire training programs. They will help us identify gaps that the 3PK didn't catch. They'll help us correct information perhaps that was mistaught when the remedial training was done. They can provide us with any number of elements that could be very important to us. So that's a second loop, if you will, in the SMS process for PABC. For PABC to be effective in serving the industry, it's imperative that the 3PK always be kept up to date and accurate. And when PABC is notified that ICAO or a state civil aviation authority has changed their requirements, PABC will immediately review the changes and, if needed, will update our PABC training criteria and tests accordingly. We will also handle the changes in industry best practices in a similar fashion. Those updates, however, will be made annually rather than immediately. And in both cases, whenever the changes are made, PABC will notify all stakeholders of the revisions as part of our ongoing service to the industry. I'm sure you know about continuing professional development and its extensive use by engineering, scientific, financial, and other high-stakes disciplines to keep their professionals current on the latest practices in their industry. PABC certified pilots will be expected to earn CPD credits to keep their credential current by participating in the kinds of activities that are shown here. PABC's website will maintain a list of approved sources and activities for earning CPD credit. and a continuously updated account of the CPD credits that each pilot has earned since taking his or her last 3PK test will be maintained on that website as well. The normal lifespan of PABC's 3PK credential is 7 years if the pilot completes his or her annual CPD requirements. However, if the pilot fails to satisfy those requirements, the PABC website will show the credential as inactive in as little as 4 years, and this is because of the rapid changes in our industry. Passing a test created several years ago may not assure that the pilot possesses the knowledge, skills, or competencies in the industry that the industry now knows he or she may need in order to enter an initial new hire training program. If a pilot becomes inactive, he or she will need to take the full 3PK test again in order to requalify for the credential. Like most professional certifications, PABC's 3PK credential will need to be renewed every 7 years. This testing cycle ensures that pilots have the knowledge and competency required of entry-level professionals in the subject areas that have changed since they last passed either an initial or renewal test. Both CPD and renewal testing are vital elements in gaining and retaining ICAO and state civil aviation authorities' acceptance of the 3PK exam as an ongoing alternative means of compliance for their ATP level tests. Please note the title of this slide indicating that PABC has taken on a self-imposed dual layer of accountability in order to assure our future operations. Our intent is to make a full and firm commitment to the stakeholders of the industry that PABC's policies and practices will comply with the highest international standards for organizations that serve as professional certification bodies. Another way of saying that is professional testing organizations. PABC takes full responsibility for creating the 3PK training criteria and tests that we develop in conjunction with subject matter experts from around the world. However, we also rely on outside experts for their special counsel and oversight in order to provide the highest level and quality of service possible. The International Standards Organization, ISO, is the world's gold standard for operating a professional testing and certification body. They define the criteria that are used to accredit each feature and function involved in developing and operating, first of all, the training criteria, and secondly, the testing programs, and everything from the test items themselves through the administration and management of the test. To acquire and retain ISO accreditation, PABC will undergo annual reviews and biannual on-site ISO visits. PABC is fully committed to finding a respected aviation organization like the International Pilot Training Consortium to audit the flight technical and service aspects of PABC's operation so that we provide maximum benefits for our aviation stakeholders, including the regulators, the public, and even the youth who dream of becoming professional pilots in the future. We invite this oversight to ensure that PABC is always focused on safety first, then ensure that we provide the highest level of quality services and mutually beneficial results for all stakeholders, and finally, that we ensure our sustainability so that this service can remain in force for as long as it's needed by our stakeholders. This slide shows a high-level list of some of the benefits that each of our 7 stakeholders gain from the 3PK training criteria and testing. There are even more when ICAO and state civil aviation authorities accept the 3PK test as an alternative means of compliance for their respective ATP level knowledge exams. I'll give 10 seconds for you to read this information as you see fit. You can always pause the video and then we'll move on. To provide those benefits, PABC respectfully requests that our industry stakeholders provide 3 types of support: leadership, funding, and the publicity needed to gain public awareness and support for this research and its potential benefits. As leaders who are aware of this initiative, features, and its benefits, please urge your industry colleagues and contacts in all 7 stakeholder communities to support this vital research, so that we'll have a system that provides continuously updated pre-employment knowledge training criteria and testing for pilots who want to become part of our professional workforce, and have a system for effectively assessing both the preparedness of those pilot candidates and the scope of the effectiveness of the training that they've received. And as leaders, we need you to contact both your ICAO representatives and the state civil aviation authorities with whom you are regularly engaged to encourage them to call for ICAO to create a common global professional knowledge standard for the training of career-minded ab initio pilots. With this ICAO standard in place, state civil aviation authorities will be more willing and able to consider evaluating and accepting the 3PK training criteria and testing as an alternative means of compliance for their state training standards and exams. Your financial assistance is also vitally needed. PABC's goal is to equitably share the development cost of this initiative among the stakeholders who gain the most from this endeavor, while at the same time supporting ICAO and the regulatory authorities around the world by providing these professional training criteria and this testing system. The 5 contributors shown here indeed have the most to gain from the results of this research, and therefore we're asking each of the 5 to provide cash or in-kind funding to support this project. The matching funds approach proposed by PABC is both fair and cost-effective for all contributors, so that no single contributor gets stuck with the disproportionate share of the total bill. And the justification safeguards that we have incorporated in our process ensure that each step we take in this 6-step process is fully justified by the evidence we've collected during the step that we've just completed. In other words, Step 1 research findings must justify taking Step 2, Step 2 findings must justify Step 3, and so on through the entire project. Creating a cost estimate for this 7-year project is indeed challenging. Any number of factors beyond PABC's control could make it necessary for us to modify the plans that we make today. But PABC will soon release our best estimate of the retail cost of conducting this research project. And as we work through each step, our goal will be to deliver the quality, features, and functions expected on time and under budget. Our third and final request is for your help in building stakeholder and public support and encouragement for this project. We ask you that you urge the leaders of your own organizations and your industry colleagues to inform the public of this safety-based workforce development initiative to proactively ensure that our workforce is always well-trained and able to safely support the rapid changes and planned expansion of our global air transport system. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this 4-part message. On behalf of PABC, I sincerely thank you for making time to listen to this presentation. We look forward to any comments or questions that you might have, and we're hopeful that we'll have an opportunity to work with you on this in the days ahead. We'll close for now with thanks again and our very best regards. Good day.